The much maligned saturated fats, which Americans are trying to avoid, are not the cause of our modern diseases. In fact, they play many important roles in the body's chemistry. That was Susie Fallon, founder of the Western Price and Mary Ing Foundation. This is AllMinucOne. My name is Bill, guys. Please, if you like my content, hit that like button, share, subscribe. Make a comment. I'll comment back. I promise. I try to quite often. Otherwise, let's get into it. So today we are going to talk about the politicization, if I could speak, the politicization of diet. Believe it or not, diet, as all things in Western society, especially American culture, is politicized. And we have to politicize the climate, we have to politicize race, we have to politicize everything, don't we? There is no corner, no stone unturned. So let's get into it. Amazingly, from the New York Times, this is from their wellness blog, a decades-old study rediscovered challenges advice on saturated fat. Dun, dun, dun. This is from 2016, people. You probably never heard of this. Probably have no clue about this. I have quite a large body of research, personal research into this subject for, 15 years now. I don't look into it as much because it's pretty much settled in my opinion. It's been settled for a decade. So it says, a 4 decades old study recently discovered in a dusty basement has risen new questions about long-standing dietary advice and the perils of saturated fat in the American diet. The research known as the Minnesota Coronary experiment was a major controlled clinical trial conducted from 1968 to 1973. Remember those dates. We will return to those dates. Which studied the diets of more than 9,000 people at state mental hospitals and nursing homes, meaning these people were under a controlled diet. It doesn't get any better than this. The problem with most studies is, the modern studies at least, is their epidemiological and their surveys. That is their post hoc, after the fact. People are asked what they ate. And much like if you ask many people what they ate the day before, they're not going to remember. So try to imagine what you have eaten for weeks or for a month. How many times have you had beef? How many times have you had chicken? How much sugar have you had? All that stuff. And then they call this an epidemiological study. It's not a study. It's a poorly conducted survey. On top of that, I've had so many people over the years that I've spoke with tell me things like, oh, keto's bad because of the fat, that kind of stuff. People are saying carnivore's bad now. Veganism, everyone knows vegetables are the healthy part of your diet. That's the good part. There's very little proof. There's very little evidence. The most nutritious things, bioavailable things, by the science, by chemistry, are first, animal products, meats, fats, organs. And secondly, spices. Aside from that, very, very little else to provide nutrition. It's just very hard. We don't have a triple stomach system that we can eat a lot of foliage and extract nutrients from it. It doesn't work that way, folks. Now, is there ancestral heritage diets that are probably good for some people? Absolutely. Different cultures have had more plant products or certain types of plant products, different kinds of meats, whatever else. I think that it will bear out throughout time. We know through genetics that is a truth. And most people that tell me they understand things about diet, they're all overweight. I've never been overweight in my life. Well, I shouldn't say that. I've been a little slightly overweight, like 10 pounds a few times in my life because I've gotten lazy. But otherwise, I've never been overweight in my life. And when people tell me that, oh, keto's bad for you and stuff like that, yet they have heart issues, they're overweight, and whatever else, I'm just like, okay, sure. Yeah. What have you read? You're just parroting some nonsense. Anyways, let's get back to this article. It says, during the study, which was Paid for by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, led by Dr. Ivan Franz Jr. of the University of Minnesota Medical School, researchers were able to tightly regulate the diets of the institutionalized study subjects. Half of those subjects were fed meals rich in saturated fat from milk, cheese, and beef. All that good stuff that makes you grow, kids. The remaining group ate a diet which much of the saturated fat was removed and replaced with corn oil or unsaturated fat that is common in many processed foods today. The study was intended to show that by removing saturated fats from people's diets and replacing it with polyunsaturated fats from vegetable oils would protect them against heart disease and lower their mortality. No. It will raise it. This is the dietary advice that the government has been giving us for years, that the institutions have been telling us for years. And guess what? The rate of heart disease and diabetes has gone up, and they act like they can't figure it out. There is a thing that used to be called the French paradox. The French paradox was this idea that the French eat a ton of fat and a ton of animal products, a lot of meat and cheese. And the scientists couldn't figure out, even with their high amount of smoking, why they had such low levels of heart disease. Well, if we went back to the science from the 1950s, the early 60s, and the studies that Ancel Keys did, he threw out all the data that suggested that it doesn't matter if you eat high cholesterol, high saturated fat diets. He threw all that out to make his point, and he was ideologically possessed. And that's what you have to understand. And that's why I bring it up, because everything I talk about is about people's ideologies, because your ideology is not a matter of fact or science. It is simply a misguided opinion, most often because you feel good about it. It makes you feel good. And it made Ancel Keys feel good to feed saturated fat to rabbits that eat grass, by the way. They eat clover on a regular basis, that eat vegetables from gardens, that kind of stuff. Rabbits. Fed them nothing but saturated fat, dissected them, looked at their heart and said, see, look at all this atherosclerosis and look at how these animals are sick. Complete nonsense. Did you know that the current recommendations by the World Health Organization, yes, that same one, recommend that vegan diets are good for nursing mothers and babies? Many of the people who were a part of that little council were quite annoyed by that suggestion. The people that outvoted them were all vegans. It's not science. So let me see here. So polyunsaturated fats, people, are about the worst things you can eat. They will give you heart disease. Your body is not intended to have very much in them. Saturated fats are stable at room temperature. Monounsaturated fats are a little bit better. Those are things like olive oil. When people tell you things like bacon are high in saturated fat, they're correct. But the way you classify a food by its fat is the majority. The majority of the fat in bacon is monounsaturated. It has a similar profile to olive oil. But see, that's science. Has nothing to do with ideology. So let's move on. So what was the result? Despite one of the largest controlled clinical dietary trials of this kind ever conducted, the data were never fully analyzed. Something fishy there. Several years ago, Christopher E. Ramsden, a medical investigator at the National Institute of Health, learned about the long overlooked study. Intrigued, he contacted the University of Minnesota in hopes of reviewing the unpublished data. Dr. France, who died in 2009, had been a prominent scientist at the university where he studied the link between saturated fat and heart disease. One of his closest colleagues was Ancel Keys. Didn't you recall, or do you recall, that I just mentioned Ancel Keys a minute ago? An influential scientist whose research in the 1950s helped establish saturated fat as public health enemy number one, prompted by federal government to recommend low-fat diets to the entire nation. Now, this is in the United States, but this has been the same advice given in Canada, the UK, Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand, as well as much as Europe. The China study some years ago tried to suggest, I believe that was done by the World Health Organization, that Chinese eat diets very low in fat and animal products, and they eat a lot of vegetables. No, they eat a lot of animal products. They eat a ton of animal products. They eat a lot of pork. They eat a lot of fatty food. They eat a lot of shellfish, things that are nutritionally dense and good for you. Do they eat vegetables as well? Yes. Are there benefits to eating vegetables? Well, yeah, there can be. Absolutely. You have to prepare them properly so they're not poisonous to you, though. You all have to understand that diet, medical advice, all kinds of things are just as politicized as anything else. Has never been any different. When I started my quick shots segments. The first one I made was, why do you trust the institutions you trust? Why do you believe what you believe? I know why 99.9% of people believe what they believe. Because they like to be led around blindly, and they like to be part of the in crowd. They like to be part of the group. They like to blend in. They like their anonymity. It's going to be one of those days, folks, one of those videos where I'm going to be a stutterer, tongue-tied, all that good stuff. But, I don't care about any of that. I don't purposely try to be a rogue, but I am rebellious by nature for sure, because I'm curious by nature. And anyone who is curious and is a truth seeker will always be on the outskirts. Like currently now, where BLM is commercial, and so is Antifa. And that's the cool thing, but it's really not. They're really horrible and evil, just like people essentially giving ideological dietary advice for decades that has probably led to advanced aging and early death of Western society in mass. Let's see here. My father definitely believed in reducing saturated fats, and I grew up that way. By the way, nobody ate like this before, and heart disease was relatively low. It started to rise with industrialized food, and part of that was because of the promotion of things like Crisco and all that. Crisco, primarily a polyunsaturated fat that they made a trans fat, which is when they saturate it with hydrogen. They just blow a bunch of molecules at it. Never found in nature before, completely destructive. Is quite horrible for your health. I wouldn't feed it to the dog, people. It says Dr. Franz, the lead researcher's son and the cardiologist at the Mayo Clinic. We followed a relatively low-fat diet at home, and on Sundays or special occasions, we had bacon and eggs. The younger Dr. Franz made 3 trips to the family home, finally discovering a dusty box marked Minnesota Coronary survey in his father's basement. He turned it over to Dr. Ramsden for analysis. The results were surprising. Participants who ate a diet low in saturated fat and enriched with corn oil reduced their cholesterol by an average of 14 points, compared to a change of just 1% in the control group. But the low saturated fat group did not reduce mortality. And that is key, because dietary fat has basically nothing to do with mortality. As the Framingham study, the quote goes, many studies and articles criticize the Framingham study as evidence from the following quote. In Framingham, Massachusetts, the more saturated fat one ate, the more cholesterol one ate, the more calories one ate, the lower people's serum cholesterol. We found that people who ate the most cholesterol, ate the most saturated fat, ate the most calories, weighed the least, and were the most physically active. Seems counterintuitive. Now, what I can tell you is that it's not about how much cholesterol you have per se, but the type of cholesterol, right? And it's not even the type of cholesterol. When they talk about LDL and HDL, you're talking about a lipoprotein carrier. And look, people, I mean, in college level anatomy, I had my instructor who was not in good shape. It was an older lady, but look, I mean, I'm nearly 40. And part of this is genetic. I look young. But it was an older lady, but couldn't have been much more than, I don't believe she was more than 10 years older than I am. Was not aging well, and was adamant about telling the class that saturated fat was bad for you and that polyunsaturated fats were good for you. This isn't a college level anatomy class. It's just absolutely sick, absolutely insane. And one of my instructors was a former surgeon. He was a doctor, surgeon, and I asked him about it, and he really knew nothing. These are your experts. If you have the ability, never trust an expert. Trust the truth. Trust the science. Trust yourself. And I don't mean crap science, because there's so much crap science out there. Here's a case. Good science prevailed. They threw out the findings. They buried them. The findings ran counter to conventional dietary recommendations that advise a diet low in saturated fat to decrease heart risk. Current dietary guidelines call for Americans to replace saturated fat, which tends to raise cholesterol, with vegetable oils and other polyunsaturated fats, which lower cholesterol. It's not good to have low cholesterol, people. The problem isn't about cholesterol, it's about plaque. It's about inflammation. Polyunsaturated fats create inflammation. While it's unclear that why the trial data was not previously been fully analyzed, one possibility is that Dr. Franz and his colleagues faced resistance from medical journals at the time when questioning the link between saturated fat and disease was deeply unpopular. Absolutely, 100%. Do you remember what they said about Dr. Atkins for years? Do you know that the natives of North America largely ate diets primarily of meat and fat? That the Inuit people ate almost 80% of their diet was fat, mostly whale blubber. There was a explorer back in the day named Stephenson who got stuck with them and ate this way forever. He was on a ketogenic diet, essentially, or a carnivore diet, if you will. And he lived that way the rest of his life. Now, eventually, he did die of colon cancer. Was it because he ate nothing but fat? We don't know. We don't know why he had colon cancer. He was also eating a lot of processed meat, a lot of canned meats that who knows what additives they had at the time. Who knows if they had certain oils in them. You know, I'll go out and get sardines, but I will only get them in water or olive oil. I will not get them in soybean oil. Same with like canned oysters. I'll get canned oysters. You can get canned oysters and some mussels and some clams, and you can make yourself a nice, very nutritious, very high mineral content chowder. It's great. It's awesome for you. It is health food. All right, let's keep going. Says, the younger Dr. Franz said his followers probably startled by what seemed to be no benefit in replacing saturated fat with vegetable oil. So this article goes on. You can go look and research this for yourself. Here, 2016, reevaluation of the traditional diet heart hypothesis, analysis of recovered data from the Minnesota Coronary experiment, 1968 to 73. So here's an abstract. This covers the paper, goes through the whole thing. You can look at it if you like. Vegetable oils rich in linoleic acid. That is the main thing that is an issue. I just bring this up not to read all of this to you, but for you to go read for yourself if you care. And you should. Here is from Scientific America. Wellness. Records found in dusty basement undermine decades of dietary advice. Here's another thing. This was 2017. Raw data from a 40-year-old study raises new questions about fats. No, this is not new questions, people. This has been settled science for years now. Maybe you don't know Dr. Volk and some other of his associates. I can't remember their names, but they did many studies on low carbohydrate diets here, and they have a book out called The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living. Now, I'm not a low carb guy per se, but I do eat carbs sparingly. I prioritize fats and things with high nutritional density. I'm not perfect either. I like pizza, guys. I like hamburgers. I like hot dogs, but I'm not eating that junk all the time. I especially like beer. I'm not sitting here telling you that you have to eat perfectly. What I'm telling you is that these institutions, like the American Heart Organization or Society, whatever it's called, the the American Diabetics Association, all those places that are trying to get people to eat healthier, they'll tell you, oh, saturated fat's bad for you. No, there's no evidence of that. It's all based on ideology. So again, we have the same thing. Same article, more or less, which challenges the dogma of eating vegetables or vegetable fats instead of eating animal fats. Why would vegetable fats be good for you? Have you ever logically thought this through? Why in the Bible does it say the land of milk and honey and the fat of the lamb? You ever consider that? You ever consider that all ancient cultures essentially ate a large portion of animal products? You know, the Aboriginals of Australia, they ate essentially a diet almost primarily of animals that they found in the outback. It says, although the study is more than just another entry in a long-running nutrition war, there is no war. We knew what the science was before this. There were plenty before World War II. There were plenty of German clinics that treated people for obesity by using low-carb diets. I believe, is it Tolstoy or Dostoevsky? I forget which. I believe it might have been Tolstoy. In one of his novels, there's a police chief that decides to cut back on his diet, and he just eats a steak. He's trying to lose weight. Absent a time machine, it's impossible to know how publications of the study conducted in Minnesota might have influenced dietary advice. It wouldn't have. Obviously didn't. So the benefits of choosing polyunsaturated fats over saturated fats seems a little less certain than we thought. We know this. There's nothing certain or uncertain. And it goes on to say the Nixon-era experiment had produced only a single journal paper in 1989, which concluded that replacing saturated fat found in meat and dairy products with vegetable oils did not reduce the risk of coronary heart disease and death. But few quantitative studies and little statistic analysis, yada, 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 a bunch of nonsense. There are plenty of studies. The studies that say differently are all rigged. They're all ideologically controlled, and I've read them. Many of them. They're poorly done. Now you think about this. An organization that gets funds from the government, right? They want to get research. The government says, well, we want diets that are grain-based and vegetable-based and that kind of stuff. Now you have this global warming. Well, we don't call it that anymore. It's just climate change now. But we have this climate change thing. So now cow farts they're the enemy. And none of you people that believe that, you don't read the science, because I do. It is completely untrue. It's insanity what these people think. In any case, these organizations, like the American Heart Association, have done decades and decades of advice and research that is completely false and have given completely terrible and wrong advice. Do you not think that they have some liability there? Do you not think that the government has some liability there? Now, see, for me, I believe very specifically that these people have been ideologically possessed. They've been brainwashed. They look at the data and it just goes in one ear and out the other because they're told this is what to accept. It is dogma. Another part of them, well, it's cruel to hurt animals. And in the other part, somewhere up the line, someone wants a weak society. Someone wants you to be weak and sick and frail, so you're easily controlled. They want you to have poor brain development. They want your children to be that way. I had a Susie Fallon quote a long time or earlier in this, and a long time ago I came across the Weston Price Foundation. I fed my daughter for years when she was young raw milk. I would drive up to Pennsylvania, lived in Maryland at the time. Technically, it was illegal to have in Maryland. Isn't that insane? Can't have raw milk. Well, go to the farm and get it. Just so that my daughter could have good nutrition. And I'm telling you, man, call me a conspiracy theorist, whatever, but there are people who literally want you to be dumb and weak and want to control your mind and don't think that you're good enough to make your own decisions. Don't think you're smart enough. And even if you were smart enough, they know better. They know better than you. Ideology, people, it makes people do crazy, horrible, horrible things. So, this is from the Nutrition Coalition. The limit on saturated fat is unnecessary, says state-of-the-art review in Journal of American College of Cardiology. That's a big paper, guys. American Journal of College of Cardiology. This was in June 24th, 2020. Did you hear anything in the media about this, or were you hearing about the coof? Probably at this point you were hearing about riots because of other ideologically possessed idiots who can't pull their heads out of their butts or the sand, don't know what's actually going on in the world, and want to go out there and LARP and burn stuff down. Did you hear anything about this? I mean, if you listen to some of the people that I listen to, like Dr. Paul Saladino or Sean Baker, those kind of guys, all they're big carnivore guys. I'm not one of them, but very interested in Peter Tia. Who else? I can't think of her name. The lady that's on Joe Rogan quite a bit. I'm going to totally blank on her name, but Dr. Bruce Ames was her mentor. Bruce Ames is an incredible man. Did great scientific research for years. But guys, there are people out there with the proper knowledge. When you start disseminating knowledge, when you make it individualized, the truth comes out. Again, that's what this channel is always about. It's about making things individualized, understanding that we do live within a collective. There is a collective, but you have to understand that no central body, no institution can hold the truth. And in fact, most times, those institutions will mislead you. That is why it is better to have a decentralized control. Always. There is no example in history where centralized command has been better than decentralized command. And the reason why is this. It's as simple as this. 2 heads are always better than 1. And when everyone thinks the same, that's not having 2 heads, people. That's just having 1 head and a lot of people being zombies. All right, let's read the article. A group of leading nutrition scientists, including a former member of the 2015 Dietary Guideline Advisory Committee and the chair of the 2005 Dietary Guideline Advisory Committee, were among the prominent authors of the State-of-the-Art Review in the prestigious Journal of American College of Cardiology, Saturated Fat and Health, a reassessment and proposal for food-based recommendations. This review found that government limits on saturated fat were not justified by science. Wow, the government doesn't have the science right. Wow, the science over the years that was democratically imposed by ideologies, wow. it wasn't right. Now, all of a sudden, we've changed our mind. Kind of reminds me of this whole climate change scam. 99% of scientists. No, 99% of scientists did not say that. That whole paper is bunk. There are people that do climate science. We can get into that some other time. Not saying the Earth isn't warming. It for sure is. It's probably part of its natural cycle along with the sun. Is there some effect with CO2? Sure. But CO2 is probably a good thing. Probably a good thing, because a warmer climate means more crop production, means warmer places on Earth to live. This stuff where all these ocean waters are going to become over acidic and all that, I don't buy it. Just don't buy it. All right. Recommendation to limit dietary saturated fat intake has persisted despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Wasn't it funny how that other article said there wasn't really any evidence? There's been dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of studies done for decades. The last decade, particularly the last two, have debunked this thoroughly. There were studies before that. Most recent meta-analysis of randomized trials and observational studies found no beneficial effects to reducing saturated fatty acid intake on cardiovascular disease and total mortality, and found instead protective effects against stroke. Although the increased lower density lipoprotein, LDL, cholesterol, it's not cholesterol, people, it's a lipoprotein. It carries the cholesterol. I'm not going to get into the science of all that. But most individuals, this is not due to increased levels of small, dense LDL particles. And that is a huge differentiation. Small, dense particles tend to not be removed or cluster. Big, non-dense particles, they're fine. But rather larger LDL, which is much less strongly related to CVD risk, cardiovascular disease, for those non-medically trained. It is also apparent that the health effects of food cannot be predicted by their content in any nutrient group without considering the overall macronutrient distribution. Whole fat dairy, unprocessed meat, eggs, and dark chocolate are saturated fat rich with complex matrices. They're also associated with increased risk of CVD. The totality of available evidence does not support further limiting intake of such foods. And then it says down here, in 2020, they released a draft asserting evidence was strong that saturated fat causes heart disease in both adults and children. This is the group that the two scientists they were talking about in the top, what's it called again? The Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. Sorry, guys, I'm not great with acronyms, so should be capped at 10% of calories. That's insane. That's insane. If you are a man and you're not eating at least 30 to 40% of your diet of fat, which I guarantee it's going to present more than 10% of your calories will be saturated fat, unless you're going to eat nothing but polyunsaturated fat, which is going to, give you probably heart disease very, very early and make you be very fat. If you're a man and you're not getting at least 30 to 40% saturated fat in your diet, we know the science is clear on this. You will have low testosterone, low libido, low energy. You'll probably be cold. There's all kinds of side effects to that. And I'm also a big proponent of micronutrient intake because despite what the experts say, vitamins are super important. For instance, vitamin D, which is a hormone your body produces, it has something to do with regulating like something over 1,000 or 1,300 processes within your body. You think that's not important? So Bruce Ames came up with the triage theory of nutrition. Triage being that thing that we do in the medical field when someone is injured or hurt, we decide who gets treated first. If it's quite serious, life-threatening, you get seen immediately. If you can wait a little bit, you get to wait. Well, the idea from Bruce Ames' theory is that your body triages what needs what. And so only so many nutrients go to certain things. And there have been plenty of studies, too, that it's very hard for most water-soluble vitamins to OD on, and a lot. You have to have a lot of fat-soluble vitamins to OD on. If you have a lower body fat percentage, guess what? It's not going to stay in your system as long. It's the same idea that, like, skinny dudes can pass drug tests quicker. Most drugs are water soluble, by the way, but something like THC is fat soluble. So skinny dudes tend to pass those drug tests quicker than fat dudes. It'll sit around. There's literally been studies on this where guys that are overweight and smoke a lot of marijuana might take them a month or two or longer to have a reduced level of nanograms of the byproducts that they test for. So this is the Journal of American College of Cardiology. This is issue 7, August 2020. Again, why was this not in the newspapers? Why, folks? Why? BostonHeartDiagnostics.com. This is from May 9th, 2018. Minnesota coronary experiment trying to see in a blizzard. And this basically goes into the way that people dismiss results, how the system is kind of corrupted. It's corrupted by grant money. It's corrupted by ideology. It's corrupted because of liability. America started off without institutions. The only institutions that we had in America were the ideas of a English Constitution. We had the Magna Carta and this idea of an English Constitution, the idea of certain rights of the citizens. We had governors who governed through the crown, and we had the churches. Now, the churches were decentralized. By the way, this is biblical. People always say, why are there so many different denominations of Christianity? Why do they disagree with each other? Because God deemed it that way from the beginning of time. There were 12 tribes of Judah, right? 12 tribes of there were 12 tribes of the Israelites. They went off once they hit the promised land, and they had no king. They had only judges to basically regulate disputes. Each tribe was autonomous. They were, an anarcho-capitalist society. Their downfall came when they asked for a king. And Samuel the prophet was quite upset. And so was God. And the reason why is because God wanted to be their king, and he did not want them to be like the rest of the world, the rest of the nations. And it became their downfall, and they became corrupt over it. He gave them Saul because he was a tall man who appeared strong, and he was an idiot. He was a buffoon. And finally, God brought about King David. But King David was an imperfect man as well, as all men are. And this is a lesson about institutions. This went on down the line until the Israelites, what was left of them, was finally captured again. Finally taken back into slavery. Before that, they had lost their faith in God. They started sacrificing their children, literally their babies, to Molech and Baal. It just, man, those of you that discredit or discount the Bible, you have no idea the wealth of wisdom that is there. What it can teach you if you truly wish to understand it. Here, this is from The Verge. Low-fat diet advice was based on undercooked science. Damning Report says the 1977 dietary goals for the United States should never have been introduced. What goals were those? Well, this was from the often known as the Montgomery Report. Senator George McGovern of South Dakota, also of other fame here, the McGovern-Fraser Commission, which changed the DNC's trajectory. But that's another that's another topic for another day, another time. Let's see here. This was highly politicized. McGovern himself tried to be a vegan for a little bit. Didn't work out for him. Vegetarian, maybe not a vegan. Veganism wasn't so popular back in the day. And look, guys, I'm not saying you can't be, but the only reason why you can be in this day and age is because we have supplementation. It's just the reality of it. But read about this, guys. This was how our food system got politicized. And what time else in history was it ever politicized? You know, when I was in school, it was 4-4-3-2. You know, you have Michelle Obama teaching certain things. This is that food pyramid. Eat sparingly, fats and oils and sweets. I would agree with the sweets thing. Not fats and oils, man. You need something for your body to be fueling yourself. And it ain't sugar, guys. Your body can produce its own sugar. It's called glycogenesis. Milk, yogurt, cheese. Oh, keep those low. Why? Those are very nutritious. Meat, poultry, beans, 2 to 3 servings. Eat all these vegetables, which, by the way, will destroy your gut. I'm not saying don't eat vegetables. I'm just saying if you eat a ton of vegetables, see what happens to vegetarians. They get bloated over the years. They can't get enough nutrition because they're not eating the things that they crave. By the way, do you find it funny that vegetarians need to eat fake meat? Is it because they crave meat? Do you think that that's not a natural thing for people to want? And guys, breads and grains, I eat these things sparingly. They should be here with sugar. Breads and grains are essentially sugar that your body breaks down. You can't get much nutrition out of them. You do not have a cow's gut. Sorry, folks. You're not a ruminating animal. It just doesn't work that way. You can talk about teeth. Fruit bats have sharp fangs. So, look, there's so many arguments that vegans have, and they're all dumb. It's probably because they need to eat a steak so they can start thinking again. In any case, I'm sorry if I'm being harsh here, but it's a little bit of humor. It says, for decades, the accepted dietary wisdom has been to eat low-fat diet, minimizing the intake of saturated fat in particular. It's been the official advice from the United States since 1977 and was echoed by the UK in 1983 and basically all across the Western English-speaking world and much of Europe now. The international team of health scientists has completed a systematic study of the evidence available back in the 1970s and 80s and concluded that the relationship of causation between fat consumption and coronary heart disease was never established. I could have told you this 15 years ago, guys. 15 years ago. There were people like Dr. Atkins saying the same stuff years ago. There were plenty of people. Ooh, the low-carb fad. Funny how that fad's been around for about 40 years now. It's funny how that fad was something that the Native Americans practiced and the Australian Aboriginals. You know that the Mongolians eat nothing. The ones that are still living on the plain eat nothing primarily but horse meat and random animals that their falcons catch. You know, they take horse milk and they let it ferment into like an alcohol. Do you know that what is it? Is it the Gasai? Is that the tribe? They eat their cows, and they tend to graze them and live primarily off the milk and the blood. They mix the milk and the blood together, and that's their primary source of food. That and whatever they might hunt on occasion. Not the Gasai. That's a spirit. The Maasai. I'm sorry, the Maasai people, the very, very tall Africans. Ultra tall, ultra big, wide smiles, very, very nice cheekbone structures. That's because they have good health. They eat good food. Government dietary fat recommendations were untested in any trial prior to being introduced. Oh, how about that? I know this, guys. Hey, if you're interested in watching this and you want some history on this stuff, go watch the movie Fathead by Tom Naughton. It is a rebuttal to Super Size Me, which is completely fake nonsense. The guy that did Super Size Me never, ever released his food journals. His calorie calculations are incorrect. There's all kinds of stuff there. Pure propaganda. Tom Naughton did a rebuttal video on that and got into some of this history, some of the science, certain people, certain interviews. Very entertaining and funny. So, anyways, right here, better known as the Montgomery Report, the Senate Committee lead nutritionist, Dr. Hegstead of Harvard University, admitted that the evidence base was for the advice, evidence base was for the advice what's somewhat lacking. There will undoubtedly be many people who will say we have not demonstrated that the dietary modifications we recommend will yield the dividend expected. So, for years I told my dad this. My dad was gaining a lot of weight. He was never a very heavy guy, and then finally he was about to be diagnosed as being pre-diabetic, and we had the same doctor, and my doctor was a very, family practitioner. My doctor was a very smart man, did his research, and my doctor told my father that, he was going to not have a good time of things. He was going to probably become type 2 diabetic and have, heart disease and other problems if he didn't get his diet in line. The first thing he told him to do was eat a low-carb diet. And after that, my dad talked to me, and he would come to me all the time. He goes, well, do you know about this? And I'm like, yeah, Dad, I've been trying to tell you this for years. But he used to say stuff like, yeah, but bodybuilders eat carbs. They eat carbs. Yeah, okay. Well, you're not a bodybuilder, and most bodybuilders don't eat very healthy most of the year. It's an extreme thing. But one person that did talk on this commission, if I'm not mistaken, was Miss Dr. Mary Ng here. If I'm not mistaken, pretty sure she was one of the doctors objecting to that. So here from the University of Chicago, the very prestigious university, talks about at the end of the most recent articles and guidelines on our President Stone fomenting diet, he pointed out that the U.S. dietary guidelines are so influential and that the new ones so helpful in management of kidney stone disease. We must question who created them and how. The guidelines must have, he implies, the kind of elaborate and winding history one expects from a success of governmental committees, which whosoever will served by volunteer scientific experts can be subverted by money, by entrenched beliefs, by dishonesty, but despite, in the long run, may arrive at good measured conclusions. And so he's essentially saying, yeah, they have these issues, but then, these things. But I brought this up more or less. He was saying the conclusions can be good. I disagree with him. I think when you institutionalize anything, you get something bad. I don't like institutionalized religion. I like people who believe in God coming together in their faith and worshiping together. I do not like being part of a institutionalized church. In fact, I think that's the beginning of the end of most churches, of most church organizations. The Bible says that the church, the ecclesia, is the body of Christ. That is the gathering of the people. It has nothing to do with a building, has nothing to do with canon laws, or any of those things. It has to do with the worship of God through Christ, who you have been reconciled to through the sacrifice of Christ on the cross to Satan, the king of this world, who redeemed you into the family of God. But almost no church teaches that today either. And that is what the first century metaphysics taught. So anyways, here it says a momentary introduction, 77 McGovern Commission. And then Senator George McGovern, History of Guidelines, Montgomery Report, blah, 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 blah. Let me ask you this, people. Where in the world in the Constitution is this authorized? Like, where is this ever authorized? That the federal government, science and politics of the U.S. diet guidelines. Like, I know Ben Franklin had like Poor Richard's Almanac, and he had some sayings and stuff. He talked about whatever. He was interested in lots of things, and other people probably were as well in their health and whatever else. But where in the Constitution does it say they get to tell us what to eat and to make these kind of guidelines? I thought those rights were reserved to the state and the people under the 10th and 9th Amendment, respectively. Like, wasn't that the thing? The government wasn't here to tell us how to eat and what to eat. that they weren't here to give a bunch of money to researchers that they liked for ideologies and ideas that they liked. Y'all need to quit being sheep is all I got to say. Stop being sheep and wake up to what is going on. Smell the coffee, people. Open those eyes. You only get one life. Now, if you believe in God, in Christ, you might get a second chance. But let me tell you this. As far as we know, you get one. You get one now. And I'm not about to go around and trust these fools that are telling me all kinds of nonsense all the time that just does nothing but harm our society. And for some reason, it's always on the left. It's always the progressives. It's always the Democrats. Yeah, the Republicans, they get on board, but it's because they just follow along with the Democrats. They get shifted. They get they're over here. Democrats are like over here, wherever, and they just get carried along, swept along with the current. Because people don't want to be the one to say no. They don't want to be the one that say, wake up. Wake up and realize what is actually happening. So, anyways, folks, thanks for listening to me rant as usual. This has been AllMinucOne. If you guys want to check out a live show, I do that every Wednesday, 7 p.m. We'll be doing it live this Wednesday. We might have a guest. I'm not sure yet. Got to figure this out. Go over to DLive_justify_memes. And that is TheEnds Justify the Memes. You can watch the replay over here at TheEnds Justify the Memes. It's a light show. It's a fun show. You know, we have a couple beers. We joke around. We do a little meme cast news segment in the beginning. Cover some topics. Just talk about what we want to talk about. Guys, if you like to support me, I have a small subscriber count. I'm not monetized on YouTube. I might not ever be. But go over to the subscribe star if you feel like it. Throw me $5 a month or something. I'll make some special content just for you. Or we'll have a Skype call or something. Whatever it is. We'll figure it out. Otherwise, leave a comment. Hit that like button. Share. Subscribe. Tell your friends. Help me grow. Hey guys, this has been AllMinucOne. I wish you all well.